This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is Vanessa Marshall, Harrison Dula from Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Joining us to discuss the 10th episode in Season 1 of Andor. This episode is called One Way Out, so I've got two of my good friends here to talk about this amazing, the penultimate episode in Season 1. First, you know him, you love him, Mr. Ross Hollebon. Ross, welcome back to Coffee with Kenobi.
Dan, so great to be here, and extra special to be here with Mark and getting to really talk to him for the first time after listening to him in Tarkin's Top Shelf for so long.
That's right. Well, that is our other guest. He is from two podcasts that you know and love, the Idiots Array podcast and Tarkin's Top Shelf. I'm talking about our great friend, Mr. Mark Sutter. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here. I've been listening to this podcast every week, listening to people's letter grades and, scoring the episodes. And I'm glad to talk about it because this show has been difficult for me to grasp with because my wife lost interest. And so I've been watching it alone because I know my kids would be bored. And so, at first I was a little annoyed by it, but this show has really grown on me. And like this episode is the perfect episode for me to come in on and talk about. So I cannot wait.
So let's go ahead and do this. We're going to give one word to describe our overall. If you had to describe the episode in one word, what is that word? Explain your overall reactions to the episode. And then, of course, a letter grade. So I'm going to ask that question and see who raises their hand. See if anybody wants to go first. Ross did it. Ross raised his hand. Ross, go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, I'll play teacher's pet here.
Okay. You got to sit in the front.
I'm going urgent. There was a sense of urgency to everything that happened in this. There is, even one of the security guards taking the people around. He was talking faster than when he took Andor to the floor. Everyone has this sense of urgency and this sense of fear as this tension continues to build and build. So I'm going to go with urgent. I loved the episode. It was beautiful. Like, it is another perfect piece into what's happening throughout the season. I've loved it since moment one, in episode one, and it just kind of continues to build. And what I love is that people that I really respect in the Star Wars community that are just getting more and more into it each time as well. So it is kind of that groundswell of support that kind of keeps building. It's fantastic.
And so letter grade?
I'm going to go solid A.
Solid A.
You know what? It could go a little bit higher, but I know that we still have two more episodes, so I'm going to give a little bit of breathing room, but this is A, probably with a little gold star with it.
Oh, a gold star. Look at that. Okay, Mark, what about you? What are your, I know, of course, I listened to you on this show, but I'm assuming you've been loving this entire series?
Well, okay. It was difficult at first because I wasn't able to watch it right away. And so the reaction online to it, like, there were a lot of people just bashing everything else to praise Andor. And, there's a difference between saying, wow, this is the greatest thing ever, and this is the greatest thing ever, and that thing over there sucks that you love. And so, like, I was coming to terms with that. My wife was really not into it. And so, like, experiencing it in that way, knowing that this is not a family Star Wars show where, like, everything else pretty much up to this point has been, once they were old enough anyway, appropriate for the family. So, like, it's been difficult. And I found out the key to me enjoying the show was just muting Andor on Twitter.
Yeah.
Because then I don't see any of that reaction. And, like, I'm not overhyped. My expectations aren't too high. And for me, if I see too much hype on anything, it's always that kills the experience for me. So, like, it could be objectively the best thing ever, and I won't enjoy it as much because, like, I was expecting 110% when it's giving 100. So this show has really grown, though, because I'm not watching with somebody who doesn't want to be there. And I'm just like, hunkered down, watching it by myself and just really engrossed in it. So like the last 3 episodes, it's been slowly growing on me, like even more. So I would say the word for this episode, One Way Out, was panic, because there were a lot of characters panicking in this moment. Even those who seem to be in control, the prisoners making their escape, they're panicked. This is like all new. They've been in this routine. They're breaking the routine. A lot of them are running around like chickens with their heads cut off. They don't know what's happening. But then also you get to the Imperial side with the ISB agent that I'm sure we'll talk about later. He's very panicked. And
Lonnie,
I would give this,
Lonnie.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I would give this episode a solid A+. And so like I would say that the show kind of went from a C to a B to an A, and we've like finally arrived at A+. And this is the episode that I'd been really anticipating, the prison break itself, because as soon as he was in there, you feel the dread, you feel the hopelessness. And we finally get some resolution to at least part of that.
Right. And I love that. And I appreciate your honesty, because then, that I think that's good. I think that's organic. I tend to, criticisms of everything is the best thing ever. Then it becomes, as I've always said, to be a real critic, your no makes your yes mean more. So, you can't, it seems really unlikely to love every single thing to the same level, the same degree, because we all have our own discerning palettes and things that we like, things that work for us better than others. And, sometimes where we're at that day, or what time of day we watch, or do we have enough oatmeal and cereal in the morning?
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Was there enough butter on the toast to properly enjoy the new episode of Andor?
I think you mean blue milk and cereal.
Yeah,
that's true. That's true.
Well, and I will say the first 3 weeks of the show, I was confronted with personal life situations that were like out of my control, that sort of blew up and were stressful. Mm-hmm. We just started this home renovation project, which started like a month earlier than expected, because the contractor was just like, hey, we can do this now. And so I have been like the first several episodes I viewed in less than ideal conditions. And so I know that plays a role. So like, sure, I can't just say like, oh no, it sucks, because my life was sucking at that moment. But I will say, like, in comparison, Tales of the Jedi was like everything about Star Wars that I've been missing with Andor, but that's by design. Like, Andor is not supposed to be about the Force and the Jedi. It's about Cassian Andor, who has, no Force sensitivities whatsoever. And so learning to appreciate things for what they are, like I did on my turnaround on the prequels, my story is that I hated them for 8 years, and then I went back and watched them again and accepted them for what they are, not what I expected them to be. That's a huge part of enjoying stuff, is saying, I didn't make it, so it's not going to be what I want it to be. So can I enjoy for what it is?
Mm-hmm. Right. That makes sense. My word for this episode is adrenalized. Mm-hmm. The first time I watched it, it was very much like a white knuckle situation. Your palms are sweating and you're gritting your teeth. And even something as simple, well, not simple, but as Cassian sawing that metal pipe, trying to, I'm assuming, break the connections and create that leak so that everything can be fried and cut off the power. That was so tense. The whole thing is just smack full of adrenaline and major cost. That's always been a critique of mine. Like, if there's no cost, then why am I emotionally invested? I am emotionally invested in this story. I think we're all emotionally invested in the story. I think it's absolutely tremendous and satisfying, because the first episode of this trilogy was devoid of hope and joy and light. And this one ends with light, with some beautiful signs of life and inspiration and perspiration and all of those things that go together. This is definitely an A+. It's a masterclass in storytelling, in film composition, in writing, just again, the performances. And I love that so much of it is done without any special effects. I mean, at the end, of course, there's some transitional shots off of that, but you could have gotten away with it without that stuff. I mean, it's just, this show, more than many shows, is truly about the human condition, and the fact that we continue to go to that idea and that concept and that archetype in a Star Wars show is why this is a brilliant series that we're going to be looking at, is very much a watershed mark in history of Star Wars and storytelling. I think.
I couldn't agree more. This is, it's a different sort of magic. The Mandalorian magic, waking up in the morning wondering what Grogu was going to get into and where Din Djarin was going to go, is one thing, but Andor and knowing his story and how he gets there and battles his way through things to even find a sense of hope. This is beautiful storytelling.
It truly is.
And in this episode in particular, the dialogue really stuck with me. There have been good lines in all of the episodes, but this one in particular, I was writing down quotes left and right because just like you said, the story ends in hope. But one of Luthen's lines towards the end that I love so much is, "I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see." And that's what makes Rogue One so beautiful. They're passing a baton. They're not the ones that finish the race, but they're running the race so that Luke can finish it.
I occasionally remind myself, look, this is also important because without this, there is no A New Hope. There is no Luke Skywalker, right? Where he is and when he isn't happening without what's happening right now in Andor. And I think that's just remarkable, absolutely remarkable. Let's talk at the beginning. There's really only one major scene with Mon Mothma, but it packs an absolute wallop. It might have been the most uncomfortable thing of the entire episode, and that's saying something with the level of turmoil that is resplendent in this. Ross, when I said that you were making a face of like, wow, let's hear what you're thinking. I mean, let's talk about this great thing. Well, I'll set up the stage. We've got Davo the gangster and Tay and Mon Mothma sitting around in Mon Mothma's house or apartment or condo, whatever it is. I'm sure the rent is very expensive in Coruscant, but I'm sure Mon Mothma can afford it. But that's why they're there, isn't it? Because they need some money. She needs some extra money for what she is calling as her charitable foundation. And he is basically saying, you know what? I can move this money for you. I can give you that loan. But of course, because he's a gangster, there's going to be a cost, and the cost is extremely high. And Ross, just take it from there. Let's talk about this sequence and why it's so squirm-inducing.
Yeah, and I love the fact that both of you have talked about how powerful some of the lines are. And I'm curious if some of this scene gets lost because of the great action that we see later. So I have 3 quotes that I kind of highlighted from this. The first one from Mon, talking about that apartment. And she says, "It's state property. The rules are strict on decor. Our choices for change are limited." That was such a loaded sentence. And it's just talking about the apartment that they live in or the condo that they live in. Like, their choices are limited. Like, this is embodying everything that they're fighting against. And it's just their living quarters. It moves on a little bit more. And with Davo, a drop of discomfort may be the price of doing business.
Yeah, I wrote that one down.
That's a heavy one. Gorgeous. Like, that is, and that's what anyone dealing with Saw is dealing with. That's what anyone dealing with Luthen is dealing with. Like, revolution is not pretty. Civil war is not pretty. There are, even if you have the best interests in mind for the end of the day, sometimes you make strange bed partners in order to accomplish your goals, to do what's right altruistically. There are sacrifices that need to be made. And then afterwards, after the, I guess, attempt at setting up the kids for a clandestine date, and how much that rattled Mon and upset her, and saying, "What makes you think I believe in doing this archaic thing anymore?" And she kind of ushers him out of the room and says, I won't even consider it. And then this guy who's been very successful in kind of the underworld says, that's the first untrue thing you've said. So he's been able to read her the whole time and understanding her approach to things. So those were the parts that, like, after that scene, I was just like, man, like, you can't do a shot that early in the morning when I'm watching these, but I wanted to take a shot and just be like, all right, unwind, relax a little bit.
There's so much tension there because, you know, any good gangster in any sort of a story, they seem to know what makes people tick. They have this almost like this sixth sense about them. You know, Don Corleone. You know, the list goes on and on and on about that. And Davos is, you know, clearly a man, at least from an exterior fashion of supreme taste and delicacies, and he's bougie, right? Very much so. And the fact that he said, no, that's the first, what did he say? The first untrue thing you've said? Does he say untrue?
Correct.
Yeah. And then when he leaves, the acting by Genevieve O'Reilly, again, continues to be very much Emmy worthy. But she's sitting there, and you have the caption on it says shudders. That's how they describe her. And she is clearly despondent, clearly upset, clearly seething with anger. But I think part of this anger is the fact that she knows that he knows. Like, she knows that there's actually a small part of her that is considering it for the greater good, and to get herself in a position where she's not under the Empire's, you know, microscope, and it must burn her insides like acid. Not saying she's going to go through with it, of course, but even the fact that she considered it and he would have the audacity to do that in her home, that's such a supreme violation. I mean, I'm assuming we're going to see more of this character, Davo. He is certainly someone that would probably play Sabak with Jabba, and they would probably both cheat. Wow. It's just talking about it, just the magnitude, the depths of evil on display here, and what evil does to good people. You know, I said this before, the path to evil is always lined with good intentions, and we've got some major landmines here.
Yeah, well, and he said that he's met with Perrin several times. So that was interesting as well, and that was just kind of slipped in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that scene, I had to take a break from that for a second. I mean, my daughter just turned 14, and so like that really hit me, you know, because her daughter is 13, his son, Davo's son, is 14. But I think what's incredible about this show is that, yeah, Cassian may be in a prison these last few episodes, but everyone's in a prison because of the Empire tightening its grasp. Mm-hmm. And it just takes a matter of time for some people to see it and to do something about it. But Mon Mothma here, she is having to consider this impossible choice in the hopes that maybe there can be a galaxy where her daughter can live freely. And, you know, she has to weigh that against the sleaziness of this guy and the fact that she clearly does not like this tradition. She doesn't really get along with her husband. And you can really tell that he is a liability for the cause of the rebellion. And so all of those things going through her mind at the same time, I don't know where ultimately she will land, but it's not going to be an easy choice. Either she turns him down or she doesn't. And either choice is a horrible one to make.
You're right. It's, again, I don't know what's going to happen with this, but I feel like my fear is that she's going to have to do it. There's got to be another way, but maybe there isn't another way. I don't know, but again, this entire thing we see throughout this at the beginning and at the end, because notice the prison escape is basically the entire middle, except for one little sequence with Luthen where he quickly leaves when he's talking to Cleia, Klea. So it's like you're seeing all these very important figures in the rebellion and how much they are sacrificing, how much they are losing so that other people can actually have a chance. We'll get to Luthen later because I think there's a lot of bombshells that I think he talks about, and his little monologue at the end is quite powerful. But we got to talk about the escape. There's no point in breaking it all down. It's a terrific, beautiful action sequence. But I think the thing that stands out to me is Power doesn't panic. Power doesn't panic. At the end, Kino is still, he's very despondent and hopeless. And, Cassian doesn't give up. Power doesn't panic. And he does this great speech. He's such a good, motivator. I'm not going to say manipulator, because he throws it out there. He says, if you're not going to do it, don't do it. But he very much puts it out there with this wonderful, charismatic gruffness. And a lot of that is just Diego Luna just being Diego Luna too. But there's so much to chew on in this. I mean, let's just take it away. There's certain things you wrote down and things you want to talk about. Let's just bring it up now because there's some stunners here.
When I think following right after Power doesn't panic, that's when he says, I'd rather die trying to take them down than die giving them what they want. Mm-hmm. And that,
I wrote that one down too. Yeah.
that gets borrowed later.
Mm-hmm.
Kino's borrowing that when he's on the microphone later, which I'm going to ask everyone to check out the 1976 film Network.
Oh yeah.
And when Howard Beale gives his iconic speech in that, I think that's exactly where Kino's speech came from, that he's giving to everyone over the PA system. And I was just like, oh my God, that's that. So that, again, film nerd stuff where I was just like, that is blowing me away right now. If
fill our audience in about that speech and why it's so important.
Yeah. So Network was about a newscaster who was beloved and had been time tested, but his ratings were going down. So the corporations were kicking him out. Hey, we need ratings. You're not being controversial enough. You're not doing this and that. So he just answered back and he was just like, okay, I'm not playing by your rules. I want all of you as an audience. And he tells them, he's like, I want you to stand up. I want you to get angry. I want you to go to the windows and yell out the windows right now. So it's activating everyone based off of just that built up tension in himself. And it is a beautiful, go see the film. It's 1976, but.
Well, you're almost expecting Andy Serkis to be like, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Exactly. And that's it. That's exactly what it leads into, which I looked it up earlier. And that was at some point, maybe it's still now, the 19th most popular film quote ever. So that's that scene that it's from. And I think that's what it builds from. And I gorgeous. I love when you can pay homage to a classic film that way.
Which really is what this whole series has been doing. I mean, a lot of the movies I grew up loving as a kid, All the President's Men, The Sting, 3 Days of the Condor. What do they have in common? Robert Redford, I know. But that genre of film, the way that those films were paced, it's the sort of thing that I've talked to people about. I wish that there were things coming out today that gave the films room to breathe. And so I'm probably an outlier on enjoying the length of The Batman earlier this year because it gave things time to breathe. One of the movies I always recommend to people that they should watch is Lawrence of Arabia. It's almost 4 hours long, and that's the fastest 4 hours I've ever had in a movie. And I don't even know why, other than it's just beautifully shot and acted. But Cassian or Andor on that level really works. And if you're tuned in to that frequency when you're watching this, there are so many small nuggets. You mentioned Network there, but there's THX 1138 in there.
Yeah.
I mean, obvious visual references. And it's really funny to watch these different shows, these different tones, and you can tell what movies the creatives loved when they were kids. With Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, you can tell they love those samurai films that inspired Star Wars the most. They love those Westerns, Sergio Leone. I mean, a lot of the films that I love and resonate with more. And so to see that speech, to see Kino finding that power within himself after that crushing defeat that you felt at the end of the last episode. And one thing we didn't mention is that this episode picks up right where that one left off.
Yeah.
And that actually disoriented me for a second, because I'm like, okay, so how much time has passed? And I realized, oh no, they're wheeling the body out right now. So like, that was a brilliant little thing they did, is they just picked it right up, and you got to see him regain that power and to become a leader. And that was mostly because he had Cassian egging him on from behind. And Cassian, he's not really meant to be that leader, but he can inspire people. Sometimes you need that person next to the person.
Mm-hmm. Plus, it again shows that, well, I think it's fair to say that Cassian has been very selfish. He may have specific reasons. It's not about feeding his any kind of like greed, or I feel like everything he's doing is in the beginning of this, we thought he was looking for a sister. That seemed to be the point. And then it became about something much, much bigger. It became about survival. Yes, he loves his mother, but he's not exactly a mama's boy. That's for sure. So he is, I still feel like through all of this, he's still finding who he is. And he ultimately realizes that he is like the splinter to go into the Empire's eye. And that's really what he is. And he's great at it. And I like that you brought that up, Mark, because his leadership style is one of encouraging others to be themselves and to get out of their own way and to just kick some butt. He clearly he doesn't want glory. He doesn't want credit. He wants to have success. He wants to survive. He wants to pick these people up and not let them be put under the boot of the Empire. And the way he works with Kino, again, Andy, what else can you say about Andy Serkis besides, my gosh, he's just brilliant. He's absolutely breathtaking and brilliant. The actual escape itself, again, is very, very tense, but I love so much everyone works together. They're handing out blasters. They're empowering everybody. The other floor leader, they show him get out of his cell. He's the one who tests the floor to make sure it actually is cold. And I love earlier on in the episode when Cassian waits to the last second before he jumps off to get into the safety of his cell as they activate the floor. It's just, he's getting really, he's got a lot of testicular fortitude, is how we're going to say it on the show, yeah. Which is just so good. But, and I was sorry to see his companion get shot right away as he's trying to climb up that little walkway that drops down, that is basically like the elevator. But it's just so well done, executed. I'm a big fan of Prison Break movies. My favorite one, yes, of course, Shawshank is brilliant, but I really like the Escape from Alcatraz with Clint Eastwood in the 70s. But it mirrors a lot of things you both were talking about, but also very much establishes power and what power is. And the real power is getting people to work together, which the Empire, they don't ever get that. It's always about crush, humiliate, mutilate, sacrifice, but never for the greater good, for the Emperor's good. I imagine if the Emperor Vader shows up, we're all going to lose our minds. But I'm almost glad that they're not, or they haven't so far, because I feel like while none of this is realistic, it's more grounded in sort of a pseudo-realism, much more so than anything involving people that are Sith.
Yeah, and I think that makes it easier to relate to as well. Like, this is struggles that any of us could be dealing with. These are struggles that are happening in other countries right now.
That's right.
If not in pockets of our own. It is people working through things and trying to overcome things, and marginalized people versus people in power. And it's something that we can all relate to an extent.
Yeah, well, and you can look at unfair sentencing and just the experience that Diego Luna brings to the table. You can tell how much he has pushed to make this the story of an immigrant, because that is sort of like he's a displaced refugee. He doesn't have a home anymore. So no matter where he goes, he's not really home. And, that's really tragic. We do get one mention of his mother in this. We don't actually see her, but she's not taking her pills. And it's like,
right,
man, everything's falling apart all over the galaxy. And we're just getting little glimpses of it. And to see the prison break happen, like you said, it's very thrilling. And I knew there would be casualties, but man, like a lot of people died to get that first group out.
Mm-hmm.
And in truth, there were more of them than there were guards. The guards, they can't afford to be surprised again. That's another thing that Cassian said to Kino right near the beginning. And he was right. They were on their back foot. And even when they were picking people off in that opening sequence, it was all still playing right into Cassian's trap. And, you know, the water flooding the floor, shorting out the entire floor system. I mean, just brilliant planning and execution. And it was sad to see some of these people that you've been rooting for to escape not make it.
It's true. It's true. I want to point out when we're talking about the prison break, the other two that helped the one who's in charge of the power, the one who has to cut the water aspect of things and cut off the power altogether, not just shut off the floors, but cut the power altogether. There are three of them in there. Kino shoots one of them to prove a point, and he's also very angry. And then the other two are left, and even when I watched the second time, there's a party that thinks, okay, Cassian's going to kill them. He doesn't. He leaves them. And all those other Imperials that are hiding in that little closet area, you know, ducked down, frightened for their lives, and they should be. They're not interested in murder. They're interested in freedom. And that is in a world of darkness, and this is certainly darkness, even though they can give you nice white leather pajamas to wear that are also utility outfits, and you know we're going to see 1 million of those at Celebration. And everything is paved in white. It's all a lie. It's all an absolute lie. And then when they all escape, they're not worried about killing. You know, I thought they're going to leave these guys alone. But if you leave them alone, you know, from a practical standpoint, then they can talk about what happened. So there are witnesses, and maybe that's not such a bad thing. I'm sure Luthen will probably be okay with that. But I just found it interesting that Cassian didn't kill those two.
Well, and it's going to be another set of eyes, another pair of soldiers that can identify Cassian, which I think is going to be interesting, because we have the soldiers from Aldani that said, yep, we think that was one of the people that did this here. Now, when they can do that again, everyone's going to be like, where's this guy coming from? How is he everywhere doing something right now?
Mm-hmm. And there's no Daedra in this episode. There's no cereal eating.
Yeah. Well, she is in it very briefly when the scene is focused on Lonnie's suggestion for the ISB should investigate this freighter that has the dead pilot, because that's what they would do. And we don't want them to see anything out of the ordinary. But yeah, I don't even know if she speaks in that scene. She's just
I don't
there.
think so. Yeah, I don't think so.
I think it's interesting how this series does take the time to sort of highlight these different side characters on occasion. And I don't know if you're ready to move on from the prison break or not, because it's most of the episode and there's so many little things in there.
Yeah, I was going to say, if there's key moments from the prison break you want to bring up, by all means, please do. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I mean, I love that they told the Imperial guys that were in the control room on program.
Yes.
Because it's like this dehumanizing thing, because that's how they've been treated. And so it's like, hey, this is what it feels like on program. Mm-hmm. Another thing, I'm sure this has been pointed out in many places, but the way that the prison and the sterile environment is reminiscent of Camino with the clone troopers, because they're essentially being treated as objects for the Empire's use, where the clones were objects for the Republic's use. And just the heartbreak, and this really killed me. You know, Kino steps up in a big way. He has this big speech. He inspires everybody to leave. And he says the line that Cassian said at the beginning, I'd rather die trying to take them down than die giving them what they want. And then at the end, he's too afraid to jump because he can't swim. I mean, he's going to die, whether he drowns or is executed, because anybody who went through that attack and is still in that prison, they're going to be executed. Those Imperial soldiers, they're going to be executed, and the entire place is going to be restocked with soldiers and prisoners from somewhere else, and none of them are going to know what happened. And that is one thing they don't want, is any information that it's possible to rebel to get out. And so it's really tragic that Kino in the end can't bring himself to escape, to even try swimming.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I see it a little bit differently. We don't see him escape, but that doesn't mean that he didn't. We don't see him go into the water, and we have no reason to believe. And Tony Gilroy mentioned this as much as in an interview recently. Maybe when he jumps in the water, that someone helps him. I mean, that would certainly stand to reason. Undoubtedly, Cassian would have, if Cassian didn't get inadvertently shoved in by all the other lemmings, because that's just kind of what it looks like. Yeah. Beautiful scene, by the way, when they show the top of the prison itself and people are swimming off. It just seems very primal and beautiful. But I don't know, Ross, what do you think about that ending? I'm really glad you brought this up, Mark.
Well, and I, again, like, that's kind of the first thing you think of. Oh, he has to get out of there. But I think what his character has shown is he's not the first one to jump in always. So like this is talking about your friends at the pool growing up. Like, who's going to jump in first? Like, how cold is it? It takes Kino a while to warm up. It took him a while to warm up to the idea of escaping. It took him a while to warm up to the idea of their plan, to say what he needed to say into the microphone. So maybe this is just like, hey, I need to see some people do it. And, oh, wait, I don't have another option. My best option is to try to swim. So again, it could go either way. I hope he's not gone. I really hope he's there, because it's beautiful. But at the same time, sometimes we lose great characters that way, who get lost in the moment. Right. I hope he finds his way, and I hope someone helps him, whether it be, I mean, they focused on the doctor a lot too when they were getting out of there. Maybe it's the doctor who grabs him on the way out. So I won't go any further on that. It could be any number of people or someone we don't even know if he escapes. But the hope is that he warms up to it after processing it.
Yeah. And there is one line in there that I loved when they get into the control room and Kino says, turn it off. And the main guy's like, that can mean many things. It reminded me of the greatest movie ever made, The Princess Bride. I don't have a gate key. What gate key? Oh, this gate key. Right. So I'm sure it wasn't a reference to that, but that's where my mind usually goes, because I love that movie.
Totally fair. So here's a question for both of you. Do you think if Kino knew at the end of this that he would be asked to swim, and that it would be, I mean, they probably would have lost me having to jump off that thing, to be honest. But do you think he would have done anything differently?
I don't know that he can. All they say the whole way is one way out. There's only one way to do this. Mm-hmm. And he's been leading that chant and that charge. So it's finally like, oh, wait, our only way out is this.
Yeah, I think that it plays out similarly. Maybe he stays behind and finds the soldiers, the Imperial guards there, to buy them a little bit more time for people to get out. But yeah, I think ultimately that one way out, there is one way out. There's only one connection where a ship can drop people off, and that's where they ultimately dive out of. So yeah, I don't think he would have had another choice.
And I don't think he would have did anything different either. I think his main purpose was to get everybody out.
And when will Disney add this to, a section near Galaxy's Edge, so we do have that awesome diving board area?
a water flume ride. Yeah, there you go.
The one way out ride.
And I do want to hear Tom Gross jump off of that and maybe have audio from him laughing and screaming as he's plunging to the water from that high.
Probably won't. Whenever he watches even a trailer that has water in it, he holds his breath. So who knows if he would even do that.
How did he survive Star Trek 4 then? That scene with the whales underwater, that takes forever.
I don't know if he's even seen that. Gosh, that's a good question. We'll have to ask him that. All right, so one more thing before we change from the prison to Luthen's confrontation at the end with Lonnie. I think it is sort of a confrontation. let's talk a little bit more about Cassian and Kino's speech. You talked about that great reference to Network, right? Network, that's the movie?
Correct.
Yeah. Which is very apt. But when you watch it with the captions on, there's a certain, towards the end, what Kino talks about, he's referencing something that Cassian said earlier in the episode, and even in the captions, they're in quotes. It's just lovely. I like seeing the buildup of this man, and it was really apt what you said about he was a reluctant one to jump in, but it's because of safety and because he knows what has happened. Same thing at the end with the water too. He knows what would probably happen. He doesn't know how to swim. Okay, but the fact that we get another example of Cassian building up this guy so that he can very much be the one in charge, it's just such a unique approach. We don't often see that in stories, do we? Where someone works so hard at building up someone else so they can be the leader, and to consistently be one without any pretense, without any ego. It's just, I find it so refreshing and interesting. I really don't know what much more there is to say about it, but I just think it's important to note.
Yeah, and he does that well. And I think Mark brought up that point. Like, there are those people that don't want to be the leader, but know how to do it. Like, I don't care. I don't want everything that comes with being the leader. Like, there are great parts of it, and there are parts that are terrible about it. So sometimes it's easier to be the right-hand person and, I can slip away right now if I need to because of X, Y, and Z. And he's grown so accustomed to being under the radar that, that's a survival tactic of his.
Yeah.
Making someone else be the leader so he can kind of slip away.
Certainly.
Well, it's like Sam and Frodo. Sam is the key to the whole thing, but he's not the one that's carrying the ring. And in sports, there's a reason they track assists as a stat, because it's just as important to be the person who sets up the goal as it is the one who scores it. So,
right. That's very true. All right. Well, let's, Mark, I'd love to start with you on this. Let's talk about at the end, Lonnie and Luthen meet up, and the way that's orchestrated is interesting. There's this great little sequence in this, like this backwater area. I don't know where they are specifically. I'm assuming it's on the same planet where the ISB is, but I don't know. And Lonnie gets this earpiece, and he communicates with Luthen through this earpiece until the very end. There's like it seems like there's a threat. At least that's how Lonnie sees it against his new child, his daughter. There's a lot, and I know, Mark, you wrote down a bunch of stuff. I'm assuming a lot of what you wrote down is from this sequence, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this was the first glimpse that I really got of just how sinister Luthen is. I mean, there have been little glimmers of it, that he's willing to use people and put them in danger for his goals. And, it's hard because if you're a commander of soldiers, you know that some of them are going to die, that some of them will have to give up their life in the line of duty in order for victory to be secured. And, there are no wars without casualties. I think he's a little bit too comfortable with that already when it's barely begun. And the confrontation, you get to see he's been keeping tabs on Lonnie. He knows that he just had a daughter, and it does read like a threat. I think he should feel threatened because he is being threatened to stay in the ISB. But then Lonnie confronts him and says, "What have you sacrificed? I'm making all the sacrifices here. What have you sacrificed?" And that's when he launches into this chilling but heartbreaking speech all at once, that he, calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I've made my mind a sunless place. I share my dreams with ghosts. Like, just the weight of that line. And he said a lot more, but that line there really got me, because he knows that his actions have already led to the deaths of many, but he made peace with it a long time ago when he looked at the math of what it was going to take to defeat the Empire. He knows he's going to have to use the tools of his enemy to defeat them. And, he burned his decency for someone else's future. I mean, just so what did he sacrifice? This is ultimately his thing. What do I sacrifice? Everything. But it's not just his own personal life. He's willing to sacrifice anybody he cares about. Mm-hmm. Any person that's willing to work with him is on the chopping block if it benefits his equation. And
I really
that
like
kind of is reminiscent of Foundation, where you've got a scientist that figured out that the way to undo everything is by doing this thing over here outside the Empire's control. So I wonder if that's a reference to Asimov. I'm not sure, but it felt like
possible.
So yeah, that scene kind of broke me because it's like, you knew Luthen wasn't presenting himself exactly as he was, but this is like seeing the Emperor unveiled. You know, he's willing to burn as much down as possible to beat the Empire.
Equation is a really astute way to explain that. Ross, you want to follow that? I don't want to.
It was all excellent. Like, it is, Mark captured it wonderfully, and being able to experience that, and with the color changes, with that kind of, it's like the color of a Trent Reznor video instead of the outdoor kind of stuff. So like you're getting grittier, you're getting, that grunge feel. And what I really took from it, I think, in addition to what Mark shared, is that Lonnie coming down in the elevator, and this is something I recognized, it goes back to Bix on the previous episode, the ISO shots that they do of the individuals once they are trapped and realize they're trapped, that's very consistent throughout the series. So you had that with Bix as she's about to scream. You have that as Kino recognizes, I have no other way out of this, early in the episode, where it's the ISO when he's in his cell. And then you're getting this ISO with Lonnie as he's hearing, oh, you know about my kid. Oh, I can't go. And the realization is, I'm trapped. I can't go anywhere. And I love the cinematography with that and how they're expressing it throughout the series.
Here. Yeah, the power of this, I like the fact that it's all told through an earpiece until it isn't, and the door opens, and then Luthen with this great cape. I mean, the wind. I mean, it just looks so...
Lando would be so jealous.
So jealous.
Vader, too.
Yeah, I know. It kind of channels Vader, and I don't think that's an accident. What is Luthen about? What does make him tick? He's clearly not altruistic. He's clearly been damaged or fractured in some way. There's some sort of catalyst that has these embers continually burning for his hate of the Empire and this willingness to do what it takes. Every time he talks about sacrificing people, whether he's talking to Mon Mothma or Lonnie or whoever he's talking to, Saw doesn't have the same kind of reaction, but there's similar stuff there. He just says it very flippantly. I have a hard time believing that he's that soulless and compassionateless, because I just don't think that's true. But he has to play the end game, and he basically, what the speech that Mark captured for us is basically him saying, look, I had to give up my conscience. I had to give up everything. I had to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. In his mind, this is the only way, which is a very dangerous way to think. It's not an open-minded way to think at all. And now it's easy for me to say because I'm not dealing with the threat of the Empire looming over everything that I do, because it's, unfortunately not how it is in good old Central Illinois. But it's still disarming, and yet Luthen still is probably my favorite character in this not named Mon Mothma.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Well, and I'm curious, is this, Dan, knowing your thoughts on Saw Gerrera, is Luthen worse than Saw at this point?
Well, that's the real question, isn't it?
Well, I think Saw's willing to give his life for the cause.
Yeah.
Well, but Luthen, he protects his people. He won't.
That's right.
He won't go protect this other group because I'm taking care of mine. If other people get lost in the mix, that's fine. But I'm taking care of my people. Luthen isn't taking care of his people.
No, he really isn't. It's a great point. It's a great point. The scales of this are certainly out of whack, and it's going to be great to find out what happens as we get to the final episode. Well, gentlemen, any final thoughts, any stones you want to overturn before we wrap this thing up?
I think that does it for me.
Yeah, I love what the ISB is. I love that Lonnie, that I had no idea Lonnie, as I'm watching him through all the other episodes, is planted. Thank you. That's awesome.
It was great. It was a great turn. Well, you both are awesome naturally, and always bring your A games. And the good news is there are many places that all of our Coffee with Kenobi family members can find the both of you. So Ross, let's start with you. Please let us know where they can find your work and where they can reach out to you personally online.
So weekly right now, I am contributing to a recap of each episode of Andor for Fantha Tracks in the same article that Jen CWK Bankard does. So she was most recently on the show as well. So I like to think there are some heavy duty writers contributing there. I know Becca Benjamin does as well sometimes to this Fantha Track thread. But find me on Twitter at Ross Hollebon and Instagram at PopstarIndie.
And Mark, what about you? You're a busy guy. Not only are you very active in the world of Star Wars podcasting, but you have been creating your own world through your writing. Tell us about that, please.
Yes, I've self-published my first book, Vulcan's Blade, which is out on Amazon now. And I wrote that a couple years ago, and my wife just said, just self-publish it. You know, I've been trying to find an agent, and it just wasn't clicking. And I've got other stuff. I've already written 2 other books, and so I'm already editing those. So those aren't ready to be announced as of yet, but you can check out my website I created, marksutterauthor.com, which there's a blog that I'm doing, and also there will be a newsletter if I get enough people signed up for that. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram, both as at Mark E. Sutter. That's Sutter. And you can hear me on Idiot's Array podcast and Tarkin's Top Shelf, which is part of the Pitiful Little Band podcast network. That also includes Castle Kanata, although I think they're on a bit of a hiatus right now. What about you, Dan?
I'm
Dan's
around
everywhere. He's omnipotent.
yeah, right. Well, thank you both so very much for being back on Coffee with Kenobi. Really appreciate it.
Thank
Glad
you,
to
Dan.
be here.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along.